Hello and welcome to Winter Grace Senior Ministries. I am Reverend Debbie Bergio. Today we are joined by Dr. Holly Nelson Becker. Holly is an author, clinician, and professor. She will be talking to us today about the importance of spirituality and aging, how we can improve or increase our spirituality, and what effects that can have on us. Holly, I am so glad to be able to spend some time talking with you today. I know we have so much in common and a great interest in spirituality and older adults, and I just want to thank you for being here.
And Debbie, I want to thank you for inviting me. This is a great pleasure to both meet you, hear about your work as we did earlier, and then to talk about our common interests and some of the work that I've been doing as well.
Thank you so much. I know now you are a professor at Brunel University in London. How long have you been there?
I've been in London for about 5 years, since 2017, and I came over really as part of family reunification because my daughter went to university in Scotland and essentially never left. So with grandkids here now, we decided to see if there might be some opportunities. And the minute I started looking, a way opened up. You know, it's so interesting, isn't it? That's how the spiritual path often works. If it's the right way, things just seem to move forward and be smoothed out. And if it's not a particularly good way or not the best way for you, or, you know, I don't want to actually frame it that way, because we do learn from problems and challenges. And sometimes the learning is so important for our future lives and whatever we do. But sometimes if it's the wrong way, there are obstacles in our path that sort of tell us so, or we might feel on sort of a peripheral level that this isn't really going to pan out for me.
Absolutely. I agree with that perspective so much. So I know you're a licensed clinical social worker, and you have concentrated your studies and your work life on older adults.
Yes, I have. And particularly within the context of older adults, also spirituality, religion, and other areas of coping and resilience, I would say. And that is very much less common in social work. In fact, in social work, as in other professions, spirituality and religion have really not been emphasized as an area of research or interest for us. And that is probably because also in the larger society, there's been this sort of concern or anxiety about people who might be so involved in religion that they would try and convert others. So there's this real sensitivity towards, you know, trying to convert people or not convert people. And what has happened is society has really gone to that whole other direction of non-inclusion of an area that's critically important to many older people. And I'm sure many of your listeners here are here because spirituality and religion are key aspects of their life. And for a long time, it was felt that, you know, in the professional world, we couldn't talk about those things. And yet, they are so important to people. Having that forum, maybe outside one's own religious community or faith, to talk about spiritual and religious supports that one has, and also spiritual and religious concerns. So, you know, what might be going on in one's spiritual life that's challenging, that you might be afraid of sharing that with other church members because you would feel like they would either see you as more diminished in your faith, or that would challenge them in their own faith if they see that you as a model of some kind. And so, so I think, you know, opening up spirituality and religion into this broader conversation and context that allows us to look at it in many, many forms, both within our traditions and from a larger view, I think is really, really important and helpful.
I think it's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it. It's hard to a difficult topic to discuss in general society, but also a difficult discussion to open and share and be honest within a church or a congregational or a denomination context too.
Yes, and interestingly, you know, in our churches and in our religious faiths, if you know, if there's some other world, we're members of some other world religion, we tend not to talk about those very intimate moments we have with spirit. And yet, if we could share those more, or identify how each of us experiences the Spirit in very different ways, and had, many of us have had very singular encounters that have been life-changing or transformational for us. If we could be more willing to talk about that, I think people would be more understanding of their own experience, not be afraid of those experiences, and would think about them more as a part of their daily life. Now, it's interesting. There was a sociologist of religion called Andrew Greeley. He was a Catholic priest and also a sociologist, and he was involved in a general social survey that was done every year through the NORC, which is the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. And he added a question for a number of years about whether people had had spiritual experiences. And he didn't define it, just wanting to know, had they had some kind of spiritual experience. And a lot of people mentioned that they had. So, that's pretty interesting, but it's not something we talk about, also because we don't always know how those kinds of things will be received. I was just reading today about a blogger who had been attacked in some of the comments she had made. And when people can do that anonymously, there is such anger and fear that comes out, and that's so difficult. And that's why we as religious folk and Christians, really, we need to try and balance that out with the very living of our lives. Hence, when I talked to you about several ideas about what I could talk about, one of them that you thought was interesting was this idea of spiritual identity. What is our spiritual identity? And so should I go ahead in that line?
Sure. Absolutely. Please do.
Okay, so when I was thinking about spiritual identity, I was thinking in terms of what is our spiritual DNA? So what are the kinds of things that draw us, that compel us? And conversely, where are the places that we don't want to go, that we fear to go, or that we see as maybe too challenging? And we should also pay attention to that. Both the places that we like to be and we find nurture us are important, and also those places that challenge us, because those places that challenge us, interestingly, I think are on the growing edge. Those are the places where we have to have the courage, let's say, to open that up, to be able to go a little further in our lives and open up to mystery, which is one way of seeing God, the great mystery, who is always bigger than us, and for whom, we are too small in our human incarnations to really begin to get a handle on or to understand, but we know and we trust that, whoever or whatever God may be, God is greater and can hold everything, which is amazing. The Jesuits, so I taught at a Catholic university for my last few years before coming over to Brunel. And that was a Loyola University in Chicago, Jesuit University. And they talk about finding God in all things. And when you think of that really resonates with spiritual identity, doesn't it? Because it's, where is God in every situation? Even the situations where I am challenged, I will find God there somehow underneath that challenge. In the anger that I might feel in the immediate moment, what does that anger tell me about me? So those encounters sometimes are as much about ourselves as about the other person. And oftentimes we don't pick up on those aspects of who we are. But spiritual identity is sort of about all of that, it takes in all of those aspects. And it's also about, I would say, our spiritual practices. So the spiritual practices that draw us, which, some of us are involved in meditation. Many of us are involved in prayer, and prayer is an amazing, amazing resource to us. And prayer is something that's consistent throughout world religions and throughout cultures. And you can imagine it. There's so many ways to think about prayer, but you can imagine like the whole world with a prayer band around it, circling 24 hours a day, if you will, going in, you know, every direction. And when we pray, we join up our prayers to the prayers of countless other people who will never know, and they are strengthened in a way that becomes very powerful. And I think that's so important in our times when, you know, prayer is personal, but our personal issues and concerns and what we see in the immediate challenges of those we love around us, but it's also much greater than that. And it's something that we can strengthen in a private way through our own prayer, and also in public prayer when we're in churches and other places, and, you know, listening to and participating in prayer as we can. So I think that's important as well.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about developing our spiritual identity, and you mentioned practices of prayer and meditation, do you have other practices that you have learned about or experienced or research that you found beneficial?
Yes, a number of ideas are going through my head at the moment.
I'm sure.
I have let me just share briefly about my book. Do you mind if I show it?
No, please do.
Okay, so
if it's going to focus.
Maybe you can't see the title, but at any rate, I don't think that the visual didn't work very well. But within the book, every chapter has a couple of spiritual exercises. So I talk people through a process of thinking about different aspects that will touch them in their lives. And one of the ways I begin this is talking about the senses. So we all, you know, appreciate the power of what we see, what we hear, what we feel, taste, and smell. But there's ways to explore that, to go deeper in a spiritual sense. And so in each chapter, I have a few paragraphs that talk about the sense in a spiritual way, and then go through a series of steps that invite us to go deeper, thinking about how what we gain through that sense can add to our lives. Now, we're not all the same, and that's lovely. Some of us attend to certain senses more readily than others, and that's why communities are so amazing. You know, when we're together and we share together, we pick up different things, we hear different things, we come away with different things. And that's one of the amazing gifts of being in community with other people. And that's why solitary lives are often quite challenging, because it takes quite unique people to be able to self-motivate and continue to learn and grow without those experiences, both good and bad, that are offered us in community. But anyway, so that's a key one, is I think the practice of paying attention and participating in what we can pick up through our senses. And another spiritual practice is just being open to the extent of whatever comes our way or whatever we're involved in, to think two ways. So we're thinking on one level about what we're doing in that situation and what our next step is. We're often thinking about what we're going to say next or do next, but on a meta level, or a level above that, outside of it, we can think about, what am I learning through this? Or what can this experience teach me? And how can I be more open to that experience? So I think a lot of times today we get, because of fear primarily, we get so tied into our own perspectives because we're afraid of what someone else will say, or we think immediately we know what they're going to say when we really don't know. And so we fail to listen. And you know, listening well is hard. It's an art, and it's difficult. And that's why we tend not to do it well in our society today.
we seem to think, I think we seem to separate our spiritual health from other aspects of our health, if we even consider it. I mean, many don't even, might not even consider it. And how have you found, I know through your work, and you talk about the end of the title of your book is therapeutic practice, but that spiritual health, how does that, when we develop that or focus and use our energy in that direction, how have you found that it helps our emotional and mental and even physical health?
So I see this spiritual health is sort of being at the core, the center of the self, who we are. For me, that's true. Other people, of course, because of who they are and their experiences, will see it a bit differently. But you're absolutely right that that holistic sense of, the physical body needs to be in alignment with the spiritual self, the emotional self. I've come to understand in recent years how important our emotions are as a sort of a signpost to us of what is going on in our lives. And I also, so as I wrote a chapter on emotions, and also it includes depression and anxiety, but as I was thinking about the emotions, I was thinking about spiritual distress all the way to spiritual freedom. And there's a lot of emotions we don't really think about in those terms. And so I put together a little chart that was, kind of fun to do. But I'm digressing from your original question, which was about spiritual health. And so spiritual health, I think it's especially important now because that's something that is under-recognized by the medical community. Mm-hmm. And I know this because there have been some studies that have shown where, especially in end-of-life care, so that's end-of-life care is one of the places I've moved to in my research and in my writing most recently. And there have been studies that have shown when physicians have goals of care conversations with patients or their surrogates, a surrogate meaning someone that has the responsibility of making decisions for the person because they're no longer able. And a goal of care conversation is really when the physicians decide that the care is no longer effective, the curative care or aggressive treatment, mm-hmm. and that they need to discuss going into palliative care or hospice care. And so what they discovered is that there were a number of times that patients, surrogates, or the family members tried to raise the issue of their spirituality and their religion, and physicians, for the major part, would deflect that conversation or would give a non-committal answer like and move into something else. Very few stopped to really address it. Mm-hmm. And it was a very high percentage of people at this point, or surrogates at this point, that felt it should be addressed in some way in the care. I mean, it was something like, I think, 80%. I can check back that research, but yeah, it was quite phenomenal. But physicians generally, unless they themselves are quite religious and spiritual, tend not to address it. And that's a concern because spiritual distress at this time of life can be huge for mm-hmm. all kinds of things going on, not just for one's personal relationship with, who or what they envision God to be, but also with family members. Relationships break apart and come together at the end of life. And, a lot of that really is about spiritual health.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know there's also a section in your book about the brain. And brain health. And the brain health is something that I'm passionate about as well. And I was wondering if you could address that perhaps a little bit.
Yeah, so that's talking about some of the neuropsychology of the brain and some of the research that's been found. I was actually in that section citing some work by Andrew Newberg, who had done studies of the brain and sort of God consciousness. So this involves we might think of studies of meditators who have been done, some of the Buddhist monks that have been trained meditators from childhood, and how it shows that certain areas of the brain then become, how would you say, more systematized towards lighting up a certain way. And okay. So there are actual, through our actions, there are actual physical results or responses that happen in the brain, which I think is quite interesting. And also the nun study. Many people have heard of the nun study, which was done in the late 90s, but they continued to publish off of it through at least 2007, 2009. And these were studies which showed that um, nuns who had joined the convent at very young ages, and they had kept records of their brain health and other imaging all up through till the time they died. And they agreed early on to this study. And so autopsies were done, and they found that even nuns who had the hallmark neurofibrillary tangles that are a sign of dementia, the plaques and tangles both, in many cases, they function fine in their daily life. And so they didn't really show signs of, the multi problems that people with dementia often have. And so then the questions were about why was that? Well, was that having to do with lifestyle, with diet, with the work that they did throughout their lives, or what were some of the things? So those continued to be studied, those other factors. But, in looking at the brain, it seems like there are things that we can do to sensitize our brains towards the spiritual life. But that research, I would say, is early in its infancy. And of course, it's always contingent on people who will fund it. So, but yeah, the neuropsychology of spirituality and religion, I think, is fascinating. That's really not my area of expertise, but in the book, I wanted to at least point the way to lots of things.
And it's just fascinating. I mean, as you said, you believe our soul, our spiritual is at our core. We're not just so much when we think about our well-being, we go to this specialist or that specialist, but we're one person, and each aspect affects the rest of us.
Yes.
The other aspects were like a holistic approach to living. And what is your core? What do you focus on? And how that impacts the rest of your life. I just find it interesting.
So you're saying that you're asking that generically, or you're asking that?
Well, I'm just reflecting on what my understanding or my beliefs, and what I'm hearing you say kind of much more eloquently than I'm saying. But being aware of our relationship, our place in the world and in family, our relationship with God, all of those, that interaction makes such an impact on us.
That's right. And some of us feel that sense of connection. Many of us actually define religion. It comes from that term religio, about connections and so forth. But many of us feel that sense of connection very strongly. For instance, the situation in Ukraine resonates so strongly with so many of us. That war seems very impactful and present. And maybe it's more so even to me being in Britain, but I think also to people at you in
absolutely
also feel that. And partly I think it's where we are now in our understandings of war and peace and how that affects us all. One person's can't hurt without it, the butterfly effect, without it somehow impacting the rest of us. And so we know in one part of the world is suffering so greatly, but it's not just the Ukraine, it's it's famine in South countries in Africa, it's, the heat in South Asia, it's the poorer countries, which often sometimes are not as much on our radar, where we have the need to, figure out how we are going to live in response to that, or what is our part in healing that ruptures. What can we do? And for some of us, it may be, we're great at praying, we're great at meditating. And there's other of us that, hey, I'm going to get involved. I'm a doer. And partly, spiritual identity is about seeing and knowing that, and also appreciating that people are at different places with what their involvement can and should be. I don't particularly like the word should, because who decides about the should?
Right.
And for many people, that can bring a lot of pain and guilt and shame on the other side of it, of someone else's should. But sometimes we can question ourselves. Where should I be? Where should I be going? And what should I be doing? And how do I fit in the great cosmos of which I'm a part? What's my role, both to give joy and to also maybe help transform things a little bit. I thought I actually signposted a couple of things in my book, if you don't mind that I could read a couple.
Please do.
So in the preface, I wrote something about the aging world and my place in it. A lot of it, my work in aging was clinical, as you said, and also from a mental health background. I worked with older adults. So one of the things I say was, despite difficulties, the possibility to live a life of meaning and joy is immeasurable, awe-inspiring, breathtaking even. Meaning abounds through our personal reflection and social engagement. Aging is not best described by frailty, burden, or compulsory obligations, but by the opportunity for ongoing learning, volunteering, altruistic acts, and crafting a legacy of purpose in other lives we lightly and briefly join, as well as our own. So I always think that, you know, people come into our life, they enter and exit our life as friends or teachers. Sometimes that teaching is a hard one for us, but those are great learning opportunities. And those help really structure the great dance of which is our own life that we have to offer.
And I think you said somewhere like we're all in a different place along this continuum of recognizing the importance of spirituality if we've delved into it. Suppose someone's watching and thought, gosh, I've been so busy with checking off my task list, taking care of life and the logistics of life. I haven't really given a lot of thought to some of these ideas. Do you have suggestions for practices that someone can get, start to explore these ideas?
Absolutely. So of course it depends on who you are, what practice really will appeal. But the first place I would invite people to enter is a place of silence. If you're used to doing things and being on the move all the time, there's probably certain things happening that you're not able to pay attention to, right? So trying something completely different. And this also works, by the way, if we're into silence all the time, then try getting up out of our chair and doing something. But, taking the moments for silence can be so powerful and impactful, and they change us. I mean, that's I think one of the deepest possibilities and potentials of silence is that it's in the silence that ideas can enter in, and the spirit can capture us in ways where we might not have been captured before. And we can pay attention and reflect on both things we've done and things we haven't done in a way not to hurt ourselves, but in a way to teach us or open up new ideas and areas of thinking for us. And I think that silence really is the key to a lot of that opening.
Yeah. I mean, we're so connected, and we're so connected to the world, but really disconnected from ourselves and even others right now, that the idea of silence can be a little bit intimidating. Like,
a lot intimidating. And I really agree with what you're saying. We are connected. And, in 1997, 99, when the internet was first developing, and we were like, oh, is this possible? To be able to email someone on the other side of the world, or even of the US or of our state, how exciting. And it was exciting. And it's brought forward all kinds of wonderful possibilities that we've seen in the pandemic. But on the other hand, the flip side of that is that it can take us away from ourselves and from the very relationships which we hold dear, which is our families. So, there's the prosaic image of a family going to a restaurant and, say 2 parents and their children who are maybe teenagers or so, and they're all sitting at the table, they've ordered the food, and each one is on their device. So where is the affirmation in that? Where is the challenge in that? Where is the opportunity to be together in a way that enriches each other? And You know, I think families, this isn't in my book, but I believe that families have many purposes. And there's so much we learn from our families. But I mean, it's not all positive, is it? Some of us have had really tragic and traumatic and very, very difficult family lives. And there is learning there, but often it's the learning is, how do I get out of this situation? And, you know, who is there in my immediate environment that can offer support? So there's that. But when we're involved in a situation that should provide interaction with family members and we don't interact, then that's a loss, I think, to us.
I think, and when I'm just thinking, I'm thinking this is an experience, a process. It's never too early to start thinking about this area of our lives, but it's never too late either.
Yeah.
And I think, I wonder, like, how many your area of concentration has moved more towards end of life, palliative care, hospice, I'm sure, and those things, and how these ideas can really bring a richness to the end of life when you're exploring these ideas.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking of something. When I was doing a research study when I was in Chicago, and it was basically on looking at religion and spirituality as coping mechanisms for life challenges that people faced. And interestingly, my sample ended up being primarily African American and also Jewish. And so I had permission it was a lot of my African American sample came from a housing community on the south side of Chicago. And I had permission to go there and to try and recruit people. And at first they were hesitant because, you know, what's this white lady doing, you know, wanting to talk to us. And then when they began to find out the purpose of my research and what I wanted to know, they were just amazed. They would tell me when they did agree to the interview that no one ever talked to them about those things outside of church. And what I found actually was such a rich integration of the spiritual world with their daily lives to a far greater extent than I'd often seen in my Caucasian or white peers. And I often wondered whether it was the challenges that they had faced and gone through, which many of them would discuss in the context of talking about, you know, everything that was going on with them in terms of life challenge, whether that sort of paved the way towards the spiritual enlightenment and growth I seem to see there. Sorry, I got away from the other part of your question.
No, I think that's fascinating because I think, like you've said a few times, the challenges also, we learn so much from the challenges, but I'm sorry to interrupt. You go back to where you were heading, please.
No. I actually, you had asked me something right before that, and I went this other direction, and then I totally forgot the direction that you had asked me about going.
I was talking about the range of ages, and it's never too late to explore this area of our lives.
Yes, that's right. So it is never too late to explore. And of course, we've all heard about people at the end of their lives who were never interested in spirituality and religion beforehand, but then begin to ask questions. And so there's people who at this point in their lives sort of go on this lovely questioning or search for meaning that they didn't have time to ask about before. And that can be a wonderful way that people have of pulling their lives together. So there's this whole idea of life completion tasks that people have at the end of life, if they have the luxury of knowing that they're going to be dying soon. I mean, the great thing about death is that it sweetens our lives. So interestingly, when we're young, we sort of keep death like off to the side. We don't even want to think about it, right? But as we reach our middle ages and older ages, if we do start befriending death, let's say, it can really help emphasize those things that we want to do in our life now. And, you know, how do I want to live my life so that when I get to that last point, the last few days or the last few weeks, I'll look back and I'll say, wow, I'm happy with what I did, or I'm happy with that decision I made, or how things turned out. Not everyone gets to that place. You know, some people do die with difficult emotions and difficult feelings. But the thing about end of life is, you were talking earlier about holistic health and spiritual health. And really it's, you know, as the body fades out and begins to give up, because, you know, we can't all live forever, nor would we want to, then other possibilities enter in. And many of us believe that we are accompanied in our deaths by, you know, spiritual beings, or, you know, spiritual, sometimes people report seeing ancestors who come, or in the Holy Spirit with us, or whatever image, you know, if it's another, if we're of a world tradition, there may be other images that come into mind. But there's this idea that we are not alone going through that threshold, that there'll always be guide spirits, family, whoever, to accompany us there. And so it's not really something for us to fear. But then, of course, there are the skeptics among us who don't have those beliefs. You know, those beliefs are comfort to many people, but people who don't know what's going to happen, or they think, you know, death, that's it, that's the end, then, you know, that can be a sort of a more difficult time for them. But I think a lot of that end of life really is about opening us up. So, and that can, you know, time doesn't really matter. It can be in moments. It can be minutes, days, hours, a week, you know, however, whatever we need to open us up to new possibilities, or to, you know, to help us bring closure to our families, or whatever it might be. You know, all of that is meaningful, and all of that is important. And one of the things I've done at my university here in London is to host some death cafes. So this is really not something we said we would talk about, but, but anyway, have you heard that term, the death cafe?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. So just briefly for your listeners, it's a way of engaging a conversation about death from a philosophical, cultural, religious view, when people aren't, when it's not actively a concern. And interestingly, the model of the Death Cafe really began in London. The first one was held in Switzerland, I believe, but it was taken up by someone who was not really a professional. He was like a techie guy, and he started organizing the first death cafes, and it became very popular in the sense that, you know, because this is a neglected area of life for many of us, people don't know where they can go to talk about it. And so it's about normalizing this idea of death in a way that is not fearful, so that, you know, people can talk about what matters to them, and also if they choose about experiences. But it's important to note that these are not therapy. So these are conversations often with strangers who come together just for this purpose. So we did this at my university. I'm in, social work is in the health professions department. So a lot of the health professions joined together, and we had table facilitators, as well as my local hospital, Hillingdon Hospital, the palliative care team. So the palliative care docs came, and the palliative care nurses. And so we had quite a few people who were facilitating these tables, and we invited both our Brunel University community and people from the public to come. And they came and shared, and we had them do some feedback for us afterwards. And people found it really a wonderful experience. So that's another aspect.
That sounds lovely, and that really sounds lovely. I don't know that I would have thought of that word to go with that title until you shared more about.
Well, the idea of cafe, of course, is that it's done over coffee and cake, and the reason it's done over coffee and cake is to make people feel at ease and a little more comfortable. So that's the one thing that the hosting organization provides really is the coffee and cake. But there's a whole model, and if people want to Google it, Death Cafe, they can learn about the model online. And many communities, especially here in the UK, started hosting these online during the pandemic. And a lot of people do find them valuable. Of course, the people that don't probably aren't ready to go, and that's fine, because we don't really know the other side, because the people who come want to be there, and so all the
right.
reviews that are generally quite positive. But anyway, it's really a good movement, I think.
I definitely wrote it down. I will definitely be, well, we can talk more later about it, but I'll definitely be looking into that more. I just, we were talking about relationships and kind of maybe bringing relationships up to date, or that wasn't the word we used, but share this. My mother passed away the day after Christmas of 2019. She was 89, very strong in her faith. And it was the day after Christmas. So on Christmas Day, she was fine. I mean, well, relatively fine. I mean, she was very, I mean, we could have expected her to pass at any moment. It just was a surprise when it happened. But she had her address book out, got her address book. And I think she must have made 30 phone calls on Christmas to all these people in her book. I mean, of course, we talked a lot. And it was almost as if she knew that was her opportunity. That was going to be her last opportunity to talk to everyone that she loved. And so that whole idea of reaching out, and that she kind of had the conclusion, and it was, well, and it was awful, but it was wonderful at the same time. And just so thankful for her that she was able to experience those phone calls and everyone that she touched. And this conversation just made me think of that, and just wanted to share.
Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, the other thought I have, it was so great, not only for the people who she called, but for her in being able to get affirmation and share love with them, but also for you and the other family members she was with. What a great memory she left you.
Yeah.
How fantastic that most people would say, that's like the best way you can go out possible. Just what a gift.
It was a gift. I mean, she was wonderful. And of course I miss her every day, but the way that happened, it was like she had it planned out in the best possible way. Yeah. So we're God had it in his hands. And so, well, on that note, I just want to thank you, Holly, for sharing. I'm excited to be able to share this with our ministry and our community. And I'm looking forward to reading more of your book, and just love to talk to you again.
As we close, let me just share a quote by Rumi that's one of my favorites that I also put in the book. Just find it real quickly. Oh, here it is. So Rumi was a Persian poet who lived, I'm probably going to get the century wrong, but like 11th, 12th century, maybe back then. And he said, "Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are 100 ways to kneel and kiss the ground." And to me, that's keeping us mindful always about doing our best, whatever the situation is, but also remembering to experience wonder and joy and awe, and how that can fuel us and keep us motivated going forward. And I also want to say in closing that we should not underestimate our power to bless each other in our interactions, in everything that we do. It's, blessings don't just come from the priests or rabbis or pastors. They can come from each one of us as we intermix our lives and share together. And it's been a gift for me to be with you here today, Debbie, and to listen to you and share with you.
Oh, it's been a gift to me as well. Thank you so much.